Imagine waking up one day in a world where the sky isn't just blue. It's not one, but 50 different shades, each with its own unique name. Sounds like a fantasy, right? But for the Himba tribe in Namibia, this is their reality. They have numerous words for blue, each describing a different shade that you or I might simply call blue. And this tidbit raises an interesting question. Does the language we speak shape how we see the world? This isn't just about vocabulary. It's about how the very structure of our language can mold our thoughts and perceptions. This concept, known as linguistic relativity, suggests that speakers of different languages may experience the world differently. It's a journey into the heart of language and thought where every word can be a portal to a new way of seeing. So, are you ready to uncover how your language influences your worldview? Let's dissect this exciting idea, and who knows, you might just see the world in a new light by the end. But before we start, see that subscribe button? You might want to use it. Now, let's step back in time to where it all began. The story of linguistic relativity isn't a new one. In fact, it takes us back to the early 20th century. Meet the pioneers of this idea, Edward Sapir and Benjamin Lee Whorf. Sapir was a brilliant linguist and anthropologist, and Whorf, his student, was equally fascinated by languages. Together, they proposed a bold idea. Language fundamentally shapes our experiences and perceptions of reality. They observed how different cultures and languages have unique ways of describing the world. For instance, some languages have multiple words for snow or directions, influencing how their speakers perceive these concepts. Imagine living in a world where your language shapes how you see colors, understand time, or even think about space. That's the world Sapir and Whorf introduced us to. And this idea traveled far and wide, stirring debates and research across linguistics, psychology, and anthropology. And though it's evolved over the years, the core question remains: does our language shape our thought? Now that we've met the brains behind the idea, let's unwrap what linguistic relativity really means. It's all about how language influences how we think and see the world. Imagine linguistic relativity as a spectrum. On one end, there's the strong version. This suggests that language doesn't just influence thought, it completely determines it. In other words, if you don't have a word for something, you might be unable to think about it. On the other hand is the weak version. Here, language influences thought, but doesn't completely control it. It's like having a set of colored glasses. They change how you see things, but don't dictate what you can see. For example, in some languages, there are no separate words for blue and green. Does that mean speakers of these languages can't distinguish these colors? Not necessarily, but it might influence how they perceive them. So, is our thinking limited or shaped by our language? Or does thought transcend the boundaries of language? These are the questions at the heart of linguistic relativity. Ready to see linguistic relativity in action? Let's explore case studies and examples that bring this theory off the pages and into our everyday lives. First up, let's talk about color. Research shows how our language categorizes colors and can affect how quickly we recognize them. In one study, speakers of Russian, which has distinct words for light blue and dark blue, were quicker at distinguishing these shades than English speakers. Another interesting case is how language influences our sense of direction. In languages like Gugu Yamithir, spoken in Australia, there are no words like left or right. Instead, they use cardinal directions. So speakers are incredibly good at knowing exactly which way is north, south, east, or west, even inside buildings. And what about time? English speakers might think of time as horizontal, like forward and backward. But in Mandarin, time can also be vertical, with the next month being the down month and the last month being the up month. This can subtly influence how people visualize time. It's fascinating how our language can shape even the most fundamental aspects of our experience, like how we perceive colors, directions, and time. We've seen some compelling examples of how language might shape thought. But as with any bold theory, linguistic relativity has its fair share of skeptics. Let's look at some of the counterarguments and criticisms it faces. One major critique comes from the field of cognitive science. Critics argue that thought is largely independent of language. For instance, infants and animals can think and solve problems without using complex language. Does this challenge the idea that language shapes thought? And then there's the argument about universality. Some researchers suggest that certain concepts are universal and innate, not molded by language. For example, basic emotions like happiness, sadness, or fear seem to be understood across cultures regardless of language differences. And what about practical evidence? Critics point out that people can learn new languages and adapt to new ways of thinking, which suggests that our native language doesn't strictly confine our thoughts. Now, these criticisms don't necessarily debunk linguistic relativity, but invite us to look at it from multiple angles. It reminds us that the relationship between language and thought is complex and still open to exploration. Now, let's turn the pages to a fascinating chapter: the impact of linguistic relativity on literature and writing. How does our language shape the stories we tell and the poems we write? Consider this. Writers often choose words to evoke certain feelings or images. The richness of a language's vocabulary and its grammatical structures can open up a world of expressive possibilities. Think of how a poet plays with words to paint a picture in your mind, or how a novelist builds a world with language. Literature often flourishes with detailed imagery and nuance in languages with many descriptive words. On the other hand, languages with simpler structures might lend themselves to a more straightforward, yet equally powerful storytelling style. Have you ever read a translated work and felt something was lost in translation? That's linguistic relativity in action. The original language might have concepts or subtleties that don't have direct equivalents in another language. And it's not just about the language itself. The cultural context behind the language plays a role in literature and writing. When told in different languages or cultural settings, the same story can have different meanings. So, we've traveled through theory and literature. Now let's bring linguistic relativity into our everyday world. What are the practical implications of this theory in our daily lives? First off, language learning. When you learn a new language, you're not just memorizing words and grammar, you're stepping into a new way of thinking. It's like unlocking a new perspective, seeing the world through a different cultural lens. And in the world of translation and interpretation, linguistic relativity reminds us that it's not just about converting words from one language to another. It's about capturing the essence, the cultural context, and the nuances of the original message. And in our current world, understanding linguistic relativity is key to effective communication. Knowing how language shapes thought can help bridge cultural divides and foster deeper understanding in areas like business, diplomacy, or travel. Think about your own experiences. Have you ever encountered a situation where language shaped your perception or communication? Maybe a word in another language that perfectly captures a feeling that you couldn't express in your own? From learning new languages to interacting with different cultures, linguistic relativity touches many aspects of our lives. It's a reminder of the power and beauty of language in shaping our understanding of the world. And as we wrap up, let's reflect on the key takeaways from our journey into linguistic relativity. From its historical roots with Sapir-Whorf, through case studies that show language influencing thought, to the lively debate with its critics, we've seen how linguistic relativity touches everything from the colors we see to the directions we navigate and even how we express emotions in literature. It's clear that language is more than just a tool for communication. It's a key part of how we experience and understand our world. But the exploration doesn't end here. Linguistic relativity continues to be a subject of research and debate, offering endless avenues for discovery and understanding. What do you think? How has your language shaped your thoughts and perceptions? Share your experiences and thoughts in the comments below. I'd love to hear your stories. And if you enjoyed this trek into the world of words and thought, give it a like and subscribe for more great content. And don't forget to hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest videos. And if you're curious to learn more, check out this video on literature and emotional intelligence. Thank you for joining in on this linguistic adventure, and until next time, keep exploring, questioning, and continuing the conversation.